Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for March 22nd, 2024. I'm going to begin with an announcement that today at noon Eastern Time, there'll be a Zoom call of the International Peace Coalition to address the red alert which was called by the Schiller Institute due to the provocations coming from Western governments which risk the danger of World War III. I'll have the announcement of this in the description box of today's update. It will tell you how you can find out about it, how you can get onto it. And I would urge everyone to take that as a serious personal responsibility because the crisis is not getting any better, it's getting worse. Now, that was the first question I received for today's Friday questions. The person wrote, the Schiller Institute called a red alert, warning of the danger of World War III due to Western provocations against Russia. But what can we do? Well, the first thing is join us. Become part of the International Peace Coalition. We're pulling together all the various peace organizations worldwide into a single movement with the approach to take power ultimately out of the hands of the military-industrial financial complex, which control the war hawks in Western governments. And what that means is that we need a growing number of people speaking out, identifying what the problem is, what the danger is, to tell people you can't be complacent in a situation like this. If you're going to wait and see what happens, it may be too late. And so the first thing is speak out, organize people to join our peace coalition. The second thing is that be brave. Go before every elected official you can. All the U.S. House of Representatives are running for re-election this year. Find where they're having campaign events and go confront them. Why are they voting money for more wars, more death, more destruction? And demand that they join with the International Peace Coalition for solutions based on addressing the real causes of war, namely the control of finance by the international financial cartels and the control of the raw materials of the productive apparatus by this gang of corporate cartels who put their interests first. The Constitution puts the general welfare first, but who speaks for the general welfare? The corporate billionaires? No, of course not. You have to put forward what's in the interests of you, your family, and your neighbors. So join us, make sure your voice is amplified, and make sure you know what you're talking about. And that's a crucial factor because there's so much disinformation, so much censorship. These videos are being censored every single day. And it helps if you make sure you go to the LaRouche Organization to get the daily video and circulate it so that this word can get out as widely as possible. The fact that we're being censored shows that there's a fear of what we're saying, and the fact that it's not just fear of what I'm saying, but fear that you might do something to act at this moment of profound crisis. Now, the second question came from Jim, who asked, do you think these wars are part of a planned depopulation agenda? And he referred to talk about useless eaters, organizations like the Club of Rome and other oligarchical institutions that are pushing the idea of a limit to population. Well, of course, that's what Lyndon LaRouche identified back in the late 1960s, that the Malthusian idea that it's population that's the cause of these problems goes back to the time of the British Empire and Parson Malthus, who said population always grows faster than the ability to feed it. His formulation was population grows geometrically, the food supply arithmetically, therefore there's no way to keep up with growing population. Well, if you control the means of production, if you control the distribution, if you control credit, then you can assure that there'll be inadequate supplies. And what we see today is whole sections of the world under sanctions and under conditions of drought and other kinds of weather-related problems where there's hunger and also civil wars. It's not just Gaza, it's not just Ukraine. It's Sudan, Haiti. All around the world, there are countries where people do not have enough food. And the rules-based order says it's their own fault and that we can provide certain charity, but we're not going to change the financial system, which has pushed these countries into poverty, which loots the developing sector of raw materials without giving them the means to use those raw materials for their own benefit. So, of course, this is an idea that goes back to the Malthusian doctrine. Now, LaRouche has been combating this, or the LaRouche organization has been combating this since the late 1960s. The Club of Rome was a key moment. There was the Meadows and Forrester report, the MIT report, and then one after another, up to and including now this idea of global warming, the idea that climate change is the result of efficient energy production. And what do you think happens when you shift from efficient energy production, such as coal, gas, oil, and nuclear, to more primitive, so-called less environmentally hazardous forms? Well, the same people who shut down coal and oil and gas and nuclear are causing countries to have to burn wood and biomass for heat and electricity. That not only strips the forests that they claim they're trying to save, but it also puts more particulate matter into the atmosphere. So we're dealing with two problems here. There's a hoax, an environmental hoax that was produced for the purposes of depopulation, and then you have the geopolitical use of wars, of pitting nations against each other, people within nations against each other, as a way of undermining the idea of mutually beneficial cooperation among sovereign nations. So I would simply say, if you study this, what you'll see is that whether it's the intent or not, that's the result. And if you look at the various oligarchical think tanks that are part of the climate hoax, part of the whole push for environmentalism, that these are organizations that represent the most wealthy people who are operating from the idea that there are too many, quote, useless eaters, unquote. And this, of course, was condemned at Nuremberg after World War II because part of the policy of the Nazis was to eliminate those they called useless eaters. Now, the last question I'm taking today has to do with the Ukraine aid bill that stalled in the House. And I had three people who asked, do you think the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, will buckle under pressure from the permanent war faction? Or do you think he will stand up and prevent the 60 billion plus package from being voted up for Ukraine? Well, on March 20th, Johnson said the first priority is to pass a budget. And that's coming up for a vote today. It's a more than 1,000-page document, which was handed to congressmen last night, which means they didn't have enough time to really read it and study it. But the vote has to take place today. So this is why there's chaos in the Congress. This is typical last-minute bill passing and so on. But if this is passed, it would prevent a government shutdown. If it's not passed, we may be heading for a government shutdown. And so that's the club that's being used to get the congressman to vote for it. Now, then there's a recess till April 8th. And Johnson promised at that point he'll take up the various aid proposals from the Biden administration for Israel, for Ukraine, for Taiwan, and several other issues, including the border. Now, this becomes tricky because Johnson is saying he wants to do standalone votes for Israel and Ukraine. The reason for that is that Johnson supports the funds to Israel, as do most Republicans and most Democrats. And so if they put it in a separate bill, it will pass and give another $12 to $14 billion to Netanyahu for his policy of ethnic cleansing in Gaza. Now, on Ukraine, what they're holding out on is saying that we need a budget bill that includes money for the border. Now, this is typical of the horse trading and bargaining that goes on in Washington. which doesn't represent your interests in the least. There should be something done about the border, but why should that be connected to funding a losing war in Ukraine? But there's enormous pressure being put on Speaker Johnson from the Democrats and from some of the pro-war House Republicans. The Biden administration is leaning on him heavily. And also you have foreign leaders like the president of Poland, Tusk, who said that withholding these funds are endangering Ukrainian lives. Well, maybe someone should point out to Tusk that freeing these funds will endanger more lives because it will continue the war. And the purpose of continuing the war is not to defend Ukraine, but to weaken Russia. If he's worried about saving lives, they should have had an agreement back in March 2022. The Ukrainians signed it, the Russians signed it, but it was scuttled by NATO, which sent the hapless fool Boris Johnson into Kyiv to tell Zelensky not to sign the agreement. So this pretense that they're trying to save Ukrainian lives, continuing a war that cannot be won, that's taxing the economies of Western Europe and the United States, that threatens to include NATO boots on the ground, which would move us toward World War III, that's where the insanity is. What should be done is to finally agree no more funds for the war. Ukraine must come to the bargaining table. Now, in doing that, you want to give the opportunity for Ukraine to have security guarantees, not in NATO, but as a neutral country with security guarantees for Ukraine and Russia. That's what Putin was asking for in December 2021, when the Biden administration refused to talk with him. So with the pressure now on Johnson to come up with a deal that includes some kind of balancing act between the border money and Ukraine, is not a good deal. The only deal that makes sense, and this goes for Gaza also, the United States has the power to stop the genocide going on in Gaza. That doesn't mean you are excusing Hamas for the butchery of October 7th. It means you don't want to put millions of people in danger of a widening war for the sake of extremist Israeli settlers who are demanding the whole land of Palestine as their own. And the United States is the only country that has the power to say to Israel, you stop or we're going to cut off all aid. And that's what should be done on Gaza. And in terms of Ukraine, get negotiations going. Why are they afraid to negotiate? They won't even talk to Putin. They slander Putin, attack Putin, and then say that when Russia surrenders, we can get a deal. Well, that's not going to happen. So that's why the International Peace Coalition is so important. Pulling together globally networks of people who are committed to achieving a recognition of that we need a new security architecture, and it has to be connected to a new development architecture, which takes power out of the hands of the military, industrial, financial complex, the central bankers, and so on, and puts it back into the hands of governments that represent the people of their sovereign states. So join us today if you can. It's at noon Eastern Time. The information on how to get a Zoom link is in the description section, and I'll see you again next week.